course, is second book that we are covering, because we've already covered we, is He, Understanding Masculine Psychology. And I have to comment on this at the very start that the masculine-feminine dialect is out of style now. Of course, postmodernism slashed it out of existence. Feminism is trying to slash it out of existence. But that is a very deep debate. But when it comes to personal growth issues, when it comes to even interpersonal relationships, the masculine-feminine dialect is really effective. And I use it all the time. I have got infinite growth through this dialect. And if you reject and I know so many people, I know so many smart, especially smart guys out there who need this type of knowledge so bad. They are depressed, they are on meds, and they need to really, they don't understand. I'm not going to tell them, because I'm not, giving out advice like that. Like, hey, quit your medication and read Robert A. Johnson. But this is so important to understand. And I hope that I convey that through this whole course, all of Robert A. Johnson's books, about why it's not limited, why masculinity is not limited. Because let me read a quote from the book in the introduction. We must remember that a myth is a living entity and exists within every person. You will get the true living form of the myth if you can see it as it spins away inside yourself. The most rewarding mythological experience you can have is to see how it lives in your own psychological structure. And of course, he's talking about archetypes, but there is a psychological structure within us. There are archetypes. There are these codes, these algorithms that we can tap into. And we have masculine and feminine. And even if masculine and feminine don't exist, whatever the dichotomy got attributed to, that exists in it. We could call it male, female, whatever. There is truth to that. So that's what we are going to be discussing in He. But we are going to be doing it through the myth of Percival, through Galahad and the Holy Grail myth and his encounter with the Fisher King and his journey of individuation. So let's hop into it. So let's start talking about the Fisher King. The Fisher King is the king of the Grail Castle, and he is wounded. His wound is not bad enough to kill him, though, but he cannot really live and lead with his wound, though. And there's this concept that the fertility of a leader, the power of the leader, reflects the power of the society. And we still see that today. People still call some of our politicians sleepy and all these other things, and they may be, but what matters most is that, to me, what I value most in a leader is humility and a lot of other factors in terms of, I don't care what you look like, what you do. It matters really what you get done. And that's another thing that we're going to be talking about in terms of masculinity here. Because the Fisher King was injured in two ways. Either he got injured and burned by some salmon, or that he was stabbed in a duel with an Islamic knight who was also on the quest for the Holy Grail, we could say. And that's very interesting, because at some point, a clash started to happen between the two camps, between the two lunar cults, we could say, of, Islam and Christianity, and even Judaism. When this started to occur, and we can see this around this exact period, when you read Beowulf, for instance, when you read Beowulf, you can hear the prose, and you read it in Middle English, the prose is connected to nature, the forms that the language takes mimic nature. But as we continue on, it starts to get away from that. Still, though, in the Holy Grail myth, and even in the Green Knight, and really ending at Chaucer, some of that language still exists, some of that natural connection. But this is the ending of that. When the two religions start warring, when they get too extreme, we lose some of that natural sense to ourselves. But that's what happens in our life. That is the ending of the child, the three phases of life, right? We are innocent children, then we are screwed up middle-aged people, then we're back to, enlightened old people again. And, this is a very common analogy. I was just reading today about, in the first 25 years of life, you should focus on physical pursuits. And for yoga, you should focus on asana and stuff. But then you should tailor that back and start to do pranayama and really focus on that and just do stuff to maintain your body so that you can go out and make an impact on the world after 25. And then once you're about 75, you should just focus on meditation and getting ready for death. So there's phases of life have been planned out before. So it's interesting that the salmon is actually a symbol of Christ. And quote, Most Western men are Fisher Kings. Every boy has naively blundered up into something that is too big for him. He proceeds halfway through his masculine development and then drops it as it being too hot. Often a certain bitterness arises because, like the Fisher King, he can neither live with the new consciousness he has touched, nor can he entirely drop it. And I really think that the modern technical world is forcing us into Fisher Kings more than ever. It is wounding us. We don't have these physical wounds as much anymore. For instance, my Fisher King story is that when I was 19, 20, 21, I was hurting myself. I was doing skiing and martial arts at an extreme level, trying to be, it was the end of my ski career. I really wanted to be a pro skier, but that didn't work out because I was just getting so hurt. So I really went to plan B, which was martial arts, really pursuing jujitsu and martial arts. But I was just getting concussions and injuries left and right. And I was supplementing that with a ton of psychedelic use and even taking them every single day at some point. And I experienced so much power. I was hurt, but I also was hitting Christ consciousness, right? I hit this high level in my youth, but then once the trip was all over, my body was broken, my soul was broken, my mind was broken, even from all the concussions. You guys see me now, but at one point I couldn't read. When I was 18 and a half, after like 2 severe concussions very close together from extreme sports, I was a philosophy major and I failed out that semester because I couldn't read. First semester, great grades, did great. First part of that semester, second semester, doing great. And then I couldn't read anymore. I would sit and try to read Descartes and Kant, which are hard, but I was reading before these injuries happened, and I was just blanking out, dude. And this wound happened because it had to happen. And this all connects really at some level to Otto Rank's theory. Otto Rank, Carl Jung's friend and compatriot with Sigmund Freud, and that when we need to suffer, the way out of wounds are through art. We could call it bibliotherapy. And that's what I hope that we are doing here in the Men's Book Club and the Robert A. Johnson course. And through all this is that we are, through will and through art, we are healing those traumas, because I feel like I had to get injured. I had to get injured so that I could restore my mind, so that I could take the path of healing. That path of healing, if I didn't if I didn't have those injuries, I wouldn't be here right now talking. I might be in a better job, a better place in life, more happy, but I wouldn't here be pushing my artistic limits. So what happens with technology, though, is that it can do these wounds to us. Because think about this. This is kind of crazy. Look at this position. Most people sit in this slumped position, the Western body. They are slumped over all day. And in that position, their body starts to decay. They're eating bad food, gluten, dairy, way too many carbohydrates, vegetable oils, blah, blah, blah. Putting unknown things in their body. And this starts to wear and tear on the body. And by the time you're 18, 19, 20, along with some stress, you might be totally decapitated. And on top of all this, you have this high moment of reverie in terms of that you can now understand, in adolescence, 16 through 20-ish, you can now understand life. You can understand books and media for the first time at a very deep level. And that's great, but it impacts you. It actually hurts your soul. You can understand how billions of animals die every year in slaughterhouses, or whatever what happens in war and the capitalistic society we live in. All these things come to confront you. They haunt you. And that Christ consciousness is ruined. Every adolescent receives his Fisher King wound. He would not proceed into consciousness if it were not so. The graduation from a naive consciousness into self-consciousness. So, quote, it is painful to watch a young man realize that his world is not just joy and happiness, to watch the disintegration of his childlike beauty, faith, and optimism. So, and as they and in this chapter, they reference Carl Jung. Sometimes it's not a physical wound. Sometimes it's just being left out. If I think back into high school, there was a lot of traumatic things. And I would like you to talk about that maybe in the Men's Book Club, write out what you've experienced. And I'd love to hear it. So if we want to look at it from an astrological point of view, we can see the same split of the Fisher King happening. So we come out of the world. And because astrology is just a study of the archetypes, that's what it's most important. That's its most important function, and why everyone should learn and look into it. not for divination or who you really are or who you should date. So we come out of the world as Aries. We are fire. We are the bull. We are just running through it, man. And then we have to slow down though, because eventually we move into Taurus, a different time of year, the spring. And it's like, okay, let's settle down. What the hell just happened? But we're still the bull. Sometimes we have that within us still. We're not the ram. Sometimes though, we still charge. We still go crazy, but we like the luxury. But eventually though, something happens to us and we discover duality. And that's where Gemini is. And that's where the Fisher King wound lies, is that when we discover duality, we discover metaphor and contrast, even life and death. That's when this starts to occur. And that is the start of knowledge. And eventually, knowledge takes its next step in the air sign with Libra, where we learn once again after going too crazy with Virgo, we settle down and we say, what's the difference between right and wrong in Libra? We learn first duality, the difference, then we learn to discern that in Libra. And then in Aquarius, after another Capricorn rage, pandering around, we learn about love. We learn about higher consciousness. So that first wound, that first separation is a very important thing to talk about. So some quotes from this chapter, and we can actually pull some of these up. Quote, much of modern literature revolves around the lostness and alienation of the hero. Moreover, we can see this alienation in the countenance, if that's how you say that, of almost everyone we pass on the street. The Fisher King wound is the hallmark of modern man. And that is so true. Have you guys ever seen the slumped shoulders, the fire out of the eyes? That's maybe you. Have you ever seen that before? In the modern man, the dejected man, the man that's married and has 4 kids and is just blah, blah, blah. They've never recovered. They never have individuated. They've never undergone the interpersonal work to awaken again, to get through the phase, to return back to the Grail Castle. They were shown the Grail Castle, but have never returned. So, quote again, usually he seeks an unconscious, this man usually seeks an unconscious solution outside of himself, complaining about his work, his marriage, or his place in the world. Have you guys know the complainers out there? Just the man, they're just complaining and complaining and complaining. They have that wound. They are wounded. That's why they are talking like that. They really can't live. They are not living. They are, in a sense, NPCs in the world, not really making any crazy contributions, but they aren't dying either. They're going to be here for another freaking 40 years before they're gone. Even 50, 60 years, they're getting younger. That's the problem too. Like there's, I'm a teacher and I have middle schoolers that are Fisher Kings, man. They're just showing the Fisher Kings. And without a tragic turn in their life or something crazy happening or them actually listening to me or like someone who is telling them to individuate, take that path, take the hero's journey, I don't think they'll ever recover. I think they'll have this short memory of childhood and that'll be it. So the wound represents consciousness, is bearable only when the wounded is doing his inner work, proceeding with the task of consciousness, which was inadvertently started with the wound in his youth. This close association with fishing will soon play a large part in our story. And fishing is very interesting because, for instance, one of the great American authors, Ernest Hemingway, loved to fish. And actually, it was his place to heal. I would recommend the book, Hemingway, Trauma and Masculinity by Stephen Gilbert Brown, one of my professors. He runs the big Hemingway conference every year. And he wrote all about this and about Hemingway. It's the flick of the rod, the flow of the water, the movement of the fish. It helps the trauma flow, the silence. There are certain things that do this for us. And it was very interesting if we want to take the Ronchian analysis that after Hemingway got his electroshock therapy, he couldn't write anymore. The last thing he could do that was movement, the writing of the hand, he couldn't even do that anymore. And then he, shot himself with a shotgun. So the only way that we can bear this is to do the inner work. This is so Ronchian. This is will therapy, everybody. This is that. So trauma theory, really fast, everybody. This is like kind of what modern trauma theory would say. Sometimes this is the interpretation I believe of trauma. Let's say that, I outside and I got punched in the head or something. I got jumped. At some point, my body is going to shut down. My body is going to shut down and start, and be sending energy to other places. Like if you get blood choked out, your brain shuts down because it needs energy other places. But there is a psychological trauma, a psychological armor that gets frozen within us, in our bodies, and in our in like a spiritual sheath or set of armor. And the Rolfers, yoga has shown this, that sometimes it's locked in the body and sometimes it's locked in the soul, and it has to flow. It has to get out. It is locked in the body because the body can't take anymore, so it just freezes. It stops taking. It doesn't intake or receive anymore. But that's good for the short term, but for the long term, it's frozen. You have to open it back up. And when we're not doing our inner work, we're not healing. And it's very interesting to see that, because a lot of people that, like I think his name is Robert Moore. There's a famous Jungian psychologist that ended up suiciding, killing his wife and suiciding. And you're like, how did he do that? How's this guy that was probably friends with Robert A. Johnson do that? And it was probably because he stopped doing the work. He got too old, too highfalutin. And when life slowed down a little bit, he couldn't take it anymore. I had this professor, Lee Barnes, shout out Lee Barnes. He was a Vietnam vet. Go check out his book, When We Walked Above the Clouds. Great memoir. It was actually I read a bunch of Vietnam memoirs, and his was the most real because it didn't glorify anything. It really talked about having to hump around the woods and like dig and just the nastiness of it all. Not, and there's war and stuff. But anyway, Lee Barnes told me one time, what did he tell me? In his office, he told me that, for his whole life. So he leaves Vietnam and killed and saw people be killed and like traumatic experience. He gets home, becomes a police officer, works out every single day, sleeps 6 hours a night. Then after that, he becomes a casino dealer, still working out, then becomes a professor, gets a bunch of degrees, very type A personality. But at some point he retires, or he retires and just teaches a class or two, and he's too old to really work out anymore. So he had to sit. And then he realized that he had PTSD. He had to sit down. When he started to sit, he retired and he sat down and wrote his memoir. And while writing his memoir, When We Walked Above the Clouds, he realized he had PTSD, and he had to start going and seeing a therapist like all the time because of that. And that's because he had to slow down and realize, when he slowed down, he realized that how is he going to replace that inner work? He had been replacing that with action, but then a lot of it was still there. He got rid of probably a lot of the physical stuff, but the emotional stuff, it has to get out in a certain way. There's different levels to it. And I know I'm kind of going off a little bit, but there are certain levels to trauma. There's certain levels to evolving masculine consciousness. For instance, in yoga, I do masculine sequences of yoga and I do feminine lunar sequences of yoga. Both develop my consciousness and release trauma in different ways. And yeah. So fishing is a very important part of the tale, as we are going to see in a second. So we are talking about the fool, and the fool needs to ask the question to the Fisher King, for whom does the Grail serve? And let's talk about the fool in the tarot for a second, because this is another archetype. And the fool is card number 0. It could really be card number 22, or it could be card number 0. And that gives the fool power. The fool is the start and also the end, and it is nothingness. So if we look at the fool and what's happening, it looks like he's going on a journey and he's going along with his dog. But is he really going on a journey, or maybe he's coming back on a journey and the dog is greeting him? We don't know, because it is a cyclical thing. Look, it's 0. The fool actually has a lot of power, because the best way to unlock your consciousness is through questions. That may be crazy, but one of the best ways to individuate, and that's why you go and see a therapist sometimes, is that they ask questions to probe your soul. I've been asked questions before. I really asked questions of myself. They've blown my mind. It's the questions, not the revelations, that really are crazy in life. The deeper the question, the deeper you can go. The more revelation, the more ecstasy, the more sadness that you can experience. And let's do a quote. You've heard this before. Why, honey, why aren't you happy? The Grail is at hand. Why aren't you happy? We have all these things. I'm so hot. Look at this life that we have. But the man is articulate he doesn't even know how to say it, because I am the Fisher King and am wounded and cannot touch any of this happiness. And I see this so much. This is what all the cheaters, all the guys that are drinking booze and watching football every single week, they don't understand how great their life is. They don't understand their potential. They have no idea what is happening. And if you are like this and you need to embark on this journey, I have friends that are just depressed, but they are living a great life. I have this friend that's been pumping meds into himself, and he's got a great girlfriend, a great life, so smart, so charismatic, very good looking. Nope. All the way in, everybody. The Fisher King wound. He has a very bad Fisher King wound, actually, probably worse than any of I've ever heard. Doesn't really like to acknowledge or resolve that. It's interesting about Fisher King wounds because for his, it's a very apparent one, and he could be listening, so we won't even talk about it. But he never acknowledges it. Like, I've known him for years, talked about it one time, and it's like a huge part of life, man. It's a huge part of things, but that's why it's going to take. So, for instance, if he is going to be healed, and this is where it gets crazy, is that we need to start to ask, for whom does the Grail serve? And the answer is, everybody, the divine. And no one likes to hear that. I get it. Everyone is traumatized from the lunar cults, man. We've all been traumatized by the divine. But on this channel, we go into higher consciousness. When you get into yoga and into pranayama and to meditation and to karma yoga and to the pursuit of the occult, there are no atheists along that road, bro. You don't meet atheists. You don't meet atheists that make it far down that road. And even the road of love, and like I said, of higher consciousness, it requires this belief in the divine, in the forms, in energy, whatever you want to call it. And that has to exist, even though it can exist within us and it is us. It has to exist outside of us. Quote, for a man to be truly healed, he must allow something entirely different from himself to enter into his consciousness and change him. He cannot be healed if he remains in the old Fisher King mentality. That is why the young fool part of himself must enter his life if he is to be cured. And that's what happened with me, man. Like, I really, at some point, I was going crazy, man. Like, I was recovered from my headaches. I was doing great. And I got really into nature. I had always been into nature, but I dedicated years of my life to nature. Like, every single day, I'd be out in nature for hours upon hours, out in the desert. And it's a harsh world out in the desert, man. Very cold. It gets cold in the winter, and unbearable in the summer. But I put time out there and really started to feel into that energy. And I started doing something called sankalpas, which is divine affirmations in yoga. That's what it really means, saying that the divine inspiration flows through me and like all these different things. And I was an atheist. I was like, eventually through, when the guy that got the concussions was an atheist. Then I realized through my healing that there was something there, and that started to grow. But out in that desert, man, out in the shamanic desert, it started to come to me. The words, the feelings, consciousness. I started to heal, man. And doing actions for something outside of myself, writing poems about the desert, being like a emissary of the desert. I had to become the fool to do that, though. I mean, I look back at those 2 years of my life, and I wrote maybe 30 poems, read some books. Other than that, not much to really tell for that, man. Not much else happened, man. Failed a bunch of classes, man, because I was so invested in that. Nothing really happened. And it is a shock to us that the fool should have to answer our most painful wound, but this solution is well known to tradition. Let's see if we can full screen this. I think it's off the page. I'm sorry. Many legends put our cure in the hands of a fool or someone most unlikely to carry healing power, everybody. And that's how these things usually work. And that's why it's so important as a man. So we're talking about being men here and about masculine consciousness. You have to be receptive. You have to be vulnerable, everybody, in a masculine way. You can be guarded. You can show valor and courage and honor and be timid, but you have to be open to everyone. You're a man. You shouldn't be scared. If you understand masculine consciousness, you are a warrior. You're not scared of people, so you can be receptive to them. They can't hurt you. David Goggins, you can't hurt me. You can't hurt me. So I'm going to receive. And eventually, my God, dude, I've been healed before by the fool. It's happened, and it can happen to you. I used to work these security jobs, bro, and I would be, I live in Las Vegas, so I would work these jobs at like casinos where I would be down in the basement for a convention all night from 10 at night to 6 in the morning, standing in a room with another guy, and they'd make us give our phones up, and we just have to sit there and we talk. And these people were dumb. Like, but dude, during these conversations, sometimes people would just say something. Like, I would say, go on a rant, and people would just blow me away with a question, with something I could never even perceive, all with just a question. And the Grail King cannot see. The Grail King lacks clarity, everybody. And it's so funny because I have this video. It's called Caffeine Free for a Year on the channel. And I talk about why caffeine destroys clarity and how we need to have clarity. That is a unified consciousness. That is getting over the Fisher King wound, is understanding clarity. Because when you gain clarity and have an accurate perception of reality, you understand our connection with the divine. And the other day, some guy commented and he says, is this guy on something? Or because I have no idea what he is talking about. What? And he like went on this rant about, and I was like, yeah, exactly. This guy is lacking clarity. And I went to his channel and it's him just pumping iron. And I'm like, all right, there it is, everybody. Like of course he doesn't understand. He's living in the Fisher King wound, and he's like listening to he had like AC/DC playlists. I'm like, all right, in mid 30s, listening to AC/DC, going to the gym, but really not yoked. Like no real progress here. Not to judge him, but this guy was coming after me, man. So this exists out there. And the way through that, as we're saying, is through clarity. And the clarity comes from a question from the outside. So let's start with the story of Percival, because that's what this is all about. He has also been called Percival, or Galahad. If you saw Monty Python and the Holy Grail, he's the one that goes into the kingdom with all the girls and, almost gets the Grail, but then gets sidetracked because of all that. But doesn't get with any of them in the end, I think. So he is born a peasant. He lives a normal life. He isn't unique. But one day he gets, sees Five Nights Riding and gets just enamored. Has that ever happened to you? I think that's actually happened to me too. Like I remember when I first saw people free skiing, bro. Like, we all see something, but I remember when I saw free skiing, that changed my life. Like guys doing backflips, and I was obsessed. Changed my life for a good decade. And I think some people see a car, or they see a movie with the Marines and they join the Marines. Men have this weird thing that happens. And then we learn, and maybe we talk to our mom or our parents, and they're like, yeah, I had that dream at one point too. Like my dad loves skiing and he had that dream at one point too. But then we lived and moved to Las Vegas. I live in Las Vegas, and there's not very much skiing in Las Vegas. And growing up here, and my dad, who was born in Canada and moved to Utah to ski, where he met my mom, then moved here to have a job and work as a professor or whatever, did that. So it's like, that's very interesting. So he is fixated, and he then learns from his mom that his dad and two brothers were knights and have been killed, and she didn't want him to become that, but he can become that. So she gives him his garment and sends him on the way. He then goes he meets the damsel in distress and says, here, I'm moving on. And he meets King Arthur at the court. And when he gets in there, he makes someone laugh. He makes a lady that hasn't laughed in 6 years laugh. And that means that he's a serious knight, whoever does that. So these guys are like, whoa, who is this guy? And he says, I want to go kill the Red Knight. I want the Red Knight's armor, which is, where did that come from, right? Like, whoa, that's crazy. And so then the Red Knight shows up, and they get in a fight, and I'm just going to call him Galahad, honestly, because it's easiest to say, throws a knife and it kills him. And Robert A. Johnson talks about, in that moment when the enemy is defeated, adolescence is over, and the ego. Now we are into the ego, or even the super ego. Now we have this new identity. All this energy shifts into the self, into identity. And it's interesting that he kills him, though, because, quote, but our Western way is to go the heroic path and to vanquish by killing or conquering and find victory in this way. And this is how he does it in this situation. He has to kill the Red Knight. There isn't a duel. There isn't a do you stand down moment. It's like, no, he freaking throws a knife. And that's how a lot of us handle our problems. We think we need to go and vanquish them. That's this heroic path. But the Eastern path, the path in India, it's a little bit more chill. So then the things can happen in this battle. So for instance, quote, if the Red Knight battle goes badly, either inwardly or outwardly, that sum of energy will go rampant in the personality and emerge as a bully, a vandal, or as an angry young man. It can also take the form of the beaten and the defeated shy man. So we all are going to have this battle probably at some point. For instance, like My battle was, if we want to talk about, so I am enamored by skiing, and I go out and I'm skiing and I'm hurting myself, and all these things happen. And I really turned into, it went malignant at some point. And I luckily bailed out because my best friend at the time, who I was on this journey with, who had the same aspirations and fixation as me, ended up dead in a ski accident. That was his fault, you know? And that he could have prevented, honestly. It was from the ego. He had this so much displaced ego energy that he thought that he was too good for mountain safety, and the mountain killed him. You know, literally. We see this all the time, though, once again, in the defeated and the shy man who lose a battle and it goes rampant, you know, and they never become the same again. And sometimes it's just this one opportunity, and really trying to bring that out. If that's you, then I would recommend just winning some small battles, man. Really just doing some confrontations, maybe more in the Eastern way, doing some duels, hanging out and building back up, building this consciousness. So the Red Knight, because the Red Knight is the shadow, quote, of the side of masculinity, the negative, potentially destructive power. To truly become a man, the shadow personality must be struggled with, but it cannot be repressed. Thus, the boy must not repress his aggressiveness, since he needs the masculine power of his Red Knight shadow to make his way through the mature world. And that's something else that has happened in our society, that men, you know, we hear about it all the time, the beta male, soy boy, all these different things that, and you know, it's really sad because the guys who are saying that are the toxic masculinity. But as a man who's trying to engage in positive masculinity, it's nowhere to be found. Like beta guys being simps, that is like a facade for being of the shadow self. That is not what men are. And if you are that, then that's sad. Men don't live in friend zone land and never say anything. Men do not repress their aggressiveness. They channel it. They do something with it. That's what martial arts is about. That's what the warrior path and shamanism is about. It's about channeling the energy and moving it, but retaining your values. Because that's what happens, is that sometimes people know how to shift and move energy, but they lose all their values because maybe they never had any. But if you lose your values and lose your sense of self, then you are nobody anymore. You've literally lost who you are. And the other big thing that happens is that he puts the armor over his mother's garment. And quote, what boy does not impose his newfound knighthood over his mother complex? And I think that is very true, that all of us have mother complexes. Obviously, that is something that happens. And when we have this sense of power, when we finally get the accreditation and this power, we like to project, we like to overwrite what has happened, that weakness, you know, the mother complex, the mother being a mama's boy, all that stuff, being abandoned by the mother, you know, never having a mother, all these different types of things, malignant, the dragon mother, as the Electra complex, as Carl Jung would talk about. All of that bears a lot of weight on our soul for a long time, even into your 30s and 40s, if you don't take care of it in time. So now we have a quick section on Galahad's mentor, and his name is Goramond, and he teaches, quote, Percival information vital to attaining his manhood. He must never seduce or be seduced by a fair maiden, and must search for the Grail Castle with all of his might. Specifically, he is to ask a certain question. Whom does the Grail serve when he reaches the Grail Castle? So once again, we have that question. If you guys would like to know more about this and apply it to your own life, there's a great book that just came out last year, I think, called How to Find Your Life's Divine Purpose by Gregor Mali. Brain Software for a New Civilization. And Gregor Mali is, I think, one of the best modern writers on yoga. His books on asana, then more importantly, his books on pranayama, yogic meditation, and samadhi are out of this world. And this is his first follow-up that really expands outside of yoga. They are, I would say, the key texts to evolve in yoga in 2021. Once again, Gregor Mali. But he has this book, and it's about literally how to devote yourself to the divine, how to have divine visions every single day. Like we hear vision questing. And, you know, to give you guys the spoiler alert, you have to be in a meditative sattvic state in the morning, maybe outside, and to just let the visions come to you. Ask for them and they will come, but you have to be in service and ask, for whom does the Grail serve? You have to literally ask that question, not exactly, but you have to channel from the divine. And it's so funny, I keep saying divine, but I just really went deep into Jim Jones, and there was this guy in that whole saga called Father Divine. So I keep, every time I say that, I keep thinking of Jim Jones, man. And I actually had something else to say about Jim Jones, but that's a different story in this presentation. Maybe I'll remember. So being seduced by the fair maiden means being thrown off the course. We cannot be thrown off the course of the divine. Even if you get married or whatever, and that's going to happen, you have to retain yourself. You cannot self. The self is the most important thing, and because the self is a Wi-Fi antenna, an antenna for the divine, right? For divine consciousness. And so that's why it's important not to lose, because as we learned in my presentation on We by Robert A. Johnson, that's the whole point of love, is that, and I would really recommend watching that, is that we're supposed to maintain ourself, and then be with someone who is also a solid self and not project onto each other. Such an important concept. That is actually the first video I ever filmed. And we also learn about Galahad leaving his mother and how he goes and his mother is dead because of the heartbreak of him leaving. And that's a huge thing that we have to deal with, everybody, that if we leave our mother, our relationship with our mother is going to die. If we evolve as men, our relationship with our mother is going to cease to exist. And this is very heartbreaking because maybe some of us had a very good relationship with our mother, or you're a mama's boy or something. But when you actually leave, and when I mean leave, I mean you have to take a risk. You have to become something that your mother would disapprove of. You have to discard the loyalty and become something greater than she could have ever have imagined and can't even comprehend. You know, I'm sure some of you guys have dealt with that, but at the end of this doesn't mean that you and your mom have a bad relationship, but that it means that you're risking that, because if your mom's kind of a jerk, she's not going to like you and give you crap. But if your mom's a good person, you're going to have a new relationship with her as this new person. And that's the goal. And a lot of people still struggle with this, man. Like, I had a friend, man. I had a buddy, and one time he came over to my house, and we had like a kind of a get together of like some like friends group from like a decade ago. And we had this get together, and this guy just got drunk, bro. And like, you know, way too drunk for the situation. Like, we maybe all had like one shot and like, that's it. And he went like all the way. And he was like, he got kind of like way too out there. But, you know, I just kept telling him like, hey man, because he still lived with his mom. He's like this basically the only one of us in that group who still lives with his parents from high school. And I was like, hey man, you have to go find the key under your mama's pillow. And I was telling it to him while I was drunk, but I was kind of serious. And we had to literally carry him into his door. I was like, go find the key under your mom's pillow. Because like, I was just trying to subconsciously tell him, man, like, hey man, you're dealing with a lot. Like he really is, he is a Fisher King too, man. That guy is got a lot of wounds, man, because his parents are like aggressive and rough, but like the coolest people you could ever meet. And like, he just is genetically not them. He's just so different. He's a bohemian. He's like, his dad was like an NFL player or something. Like, it's not compatible. Anyway, so you have to be able to leave that. You have to be able to move on and to stake a new relationship with your mother. So instead of the mother, though, there is a new fixation on beauty, because the mother, if we want to maybe get a little bit Oedipus-y here, is the first fixation on beauty. So then Galahad projects this highest vision of beauty on Blanche Fleur, and he becomes a knight errant. And the knight errant is the man who serves the woman, serves without sex for the highest ideal, for chastity. And that's what, if we look in yoga and Hinduism, that's what brahmacharya is. We could call it seminal retention, but it also, or, you know, for as females too, sexual fluid retention, or it could be looked as developing that relationship with something higher, and putting that, saving energy for something better, for a grander purpose. One of my favorite lines about Brahma. So when people ask about that, like on my yoga channel, they're like, do you practice brahmacharya? I say, why save it when I could give it away for free? And you know, that's a very masculine line right there, right? So let's hop into some line. This is a poetic way of describing. So what he does, so for Miss Fleur, he helps save her kingdom. And this is a poetic way of describing the process Dr. Yoon speaks of as relocating the center of gravity of the personality, a careful and highly conscious process of drawing from the untamed pool of masculine energy and adding to the conscious center of the personality, which is here represented by King Arthur and his round table, because he's defeating people and sending him back to King Arthur. And that's what the personality is, man, is that the ego is good. The general ego, the ego that we create with the values that we want, is great. And that's what he's talking about here. The conscious process of character creation, of character sculpting. That is great, because, you know, in the East, they obliterate the ego. They really go all the way, and then they like tame it. But the Western mind and Western body doesn't do a very good job with that. They do that in a way that they can actually function in society. But as we've seen with the hippie movement and a lot of the spiritual practitioners that have tried that, they've hurt themselves or like become brain dead. We don't want to do that. So what is a good idea instead is character sculpting. And in character sculpting, you can also delete some stuff, but it's not as intense, because when you do, for instance, very long kumbhaka, whatever, breath retentions. Can't remember how to say it right now. When you do long breath retentions in like breathing exercises, you can go so far out, and you can delete a lot of past trauma. But you also, at the same time, when you go that deep, most of the time you actually delete the good too. So like my good memories are what makes me me and like really defines me. And I wouldn't want to lose those. And I actually have before through too much psychedelic and yoga. Like if you go too far into meditation, like at some point I was meditating for 6-7 hours a day, and it's actually atrophies the brain. They've done studies, and that actually can atrophy the brain because it's not getting enough stimulation in different ways. So this is just, like I said, another term for what we would call character sculpting. Really trying to create, taking that energy out of this masculine pool and adding it to the conscious center of the personality. And he's kind of doing this dialect here of that the masculine is the force that creates the form, and then the mood and stuff creates the form, and that's more of the feminine. So we'll get into that in a second. Often a man has to make a choice between feeling and mood. If he is engaged in one of these, there's no room for the other. A mood prohibits true feeling, even though a mood may appear to be a feeling. If a man is engaged in a mood, or more accurately, when a mood has engaged him, he automatically forfeits the ability for true feeling and thus for relationship and creativity. In the old language, he has seduced or been seduced by his interior femininity. And that's why he just lays with Blanche Fleur. And that's what Brahmacharya and all these things are about. It's about retaining energy, understanding that process. It's much larger than just sexual energy. Because as you've maybe heard of, like having, as a man, you can have multiple orgasms in the same session, in concession, through yogic breath retentions and the drawing upward of energy. Maybe one day we'll have more videos on that on the Ian James Kadanak channel. But I would recommend just practicing yoga, learning the bandhas, and reading the multi-orgasmic band if you'd like more information about that. And it's a great, because if you do it in that way, you can have, I'm just going to be explicit here, everybody. You can have orgasms at 80 or 90% without ejaculation multiple times, over and over and over again, sometimes for minutes at a time. And if I said, hey, would you rather have 80, 90% for minutes or have 100% for 10 seconds? Which one are you choosing? And then also that you don't get the bad after effects. You don't get the drop of energy and mood after the orgasm. You actually get you really don't feel that much different. You actually just feel a sense of euphoria and serenity because you haven't lost any fluids. Okay, so that was so that's why the interior. So we have this thing about mood again. Mood is what drives a lot of romantic relationships. It drives a lot of situations and altercations. But feeling is something else. Feeling is the tapping into the divine, opening up to life and consciousness. And when you open up to it, you're really opening up to the divine and really opening up to your inner self. But, and it's kind of a weird, Johnson makes a weird association between mood and the feminine, but then he is bagging on mood right here and how men can't be a part of mood. I would maybe contest that point. Oh, and that slide is blank. But, so why are men more depressed than ever? What's happened? Where have we gone wrong in this process? And Johnson says it's because of a loss of meaning, because we have been overtaken by mood. And he says, look at any man's garage. Look at all the lost hopes, man. When I look at my dad and other older men I know, there's so many things that they could have done. And that's what they say, that, the graveyard's the richest place. That, all the dreams and ideas and innovations in the graveyard are worth trillions of dollars. All the things. And there is a battle, man. So if you don't confront this battle, then you're going to take it out on your wife, on your environment. This is why men go crazy sometimes. They have no meaning. There's no reason that you attack animals or do things unless you're just highly traumatized, the Fisher King, aka, to do that to people. And when your life finds meaning, eventually you heal enough to not do those things anymore. But people do not want to battle with what's within because they have to confront so much. And then you also have to confront society at some level too, and what society has made you. And it gets harder and harder each year. That's the problem. There's more and more to do. It's harder, I don't want to say it's harder to survive, but time can be wasted easier. It's not as easy to, like back in the day, you could spend all winter doing nothing most of the time and harvest in the summer and do some stuff. And then it's like, oh, now I can contemplate. Don't have that type of time anymore. Our schedules are regimented. We are regimented. And the depression rates are out of control, everybody. And that's what I hope the Men's Book Club and this video can do. You have to find meaning. And guys who I coach always ask me, man, like, what should I do, man? I don't know. I'm like, do anything. Get good at anything. Tackle something hard, bro. Go after something for months or a year. And if you don't ever use it again, that meaning is going to drive you somewhere, because to get good at something is a very solitary thing. For instance, to get good at poetry, like martial arts, dude, for years, I just did jujitsu twice a day, 6 days a week. So 4 hours a day at least of jujitsu. And, competitions. I would come home and watch jiu-jitsu videos. That process, to be able to do that and to be able to master pain and master my mind and my body and compete with others, but then find Zen and the meditation and the yoga that went along. And then I'd be doing hours of meditation and yoga and visualization a day. That changed me. I had to spend a lot of time internally because I realized I was the puppet master. When in a jiu-jitsu match that I would win, man, or like a sparring rolling session, my best moments, I felt like I had complete control over the other person, that they just moved right into things, that I didn't yank. They would put their arm right where I knew it was going to be, and I'd be pulling them in to something, or, performing a sweep. It worked like magic. And then there were other times where it was kind of like that, and I would have to force it a little bit to get there, but then the magic would happen. And there'd be other times it would just be a pure physical attack that I wouldn't be tapped into that. But that's what happens when you get into those moods. That's what happens when you have a feeling, though, and you live with that value system and you embrace it. That when you can tap into it, that means that you've really practiced something. And I would recommend that for anybody that needs help with depression, to go and do anything. Really get into something. I, of course, would recommend martial arts, yoga, reading, writing, nature. Those are really the strong ones. Working on cars with the boys, that's great, but probably not going to be as potent. So pick the most potent thing that you absolutely don't dread. So how do men find happiness? And I would say it's by taking the sattvic path, the middle way. If we look at all of occultism and psychology, it's really about finding the middle path. It's not the path of severity. It's not the path of mercy. It's the golden path through the middle, through the chakras, everybody. Being able to activate the spine in Kundalini is not an ecstatic thing. Sattvic means calm. Most revelations happen in a very calm manner, but we have been programmed as men to think that we need to, like for me, I was out there doing powerlifting and jujitsu and skiing hard. All of that hurt me. That was cool at that age. And I was also thinking crazy. I was being a radical. I was getting amped up. I went to Utah State University with, a ton of Mormons. And when I'd get in a conversation, I would just call them out immediately. I'd be like, you are so dumb. I would be like, how can I believe anything you say if you believe this? Your life is invalid. And I would be angry, man. Like I would be amped at these people. I was like, every single person I'm going to be objective with. But that caused turmoil and tumultuousness in my soul. And there is a path in life to do this, because eating certain types of way make you feel bad. For instance, if I eat the standard American diet, I'm going to feel like crap. Like I'm going to feel like blah. But if I eat, like for instance, when I was a vegan and vegetarian, I got way too lifted, bro. I was in the stars. Not good either. But being able through, a mostly whole foods diet comprising maybe of 10% of fresh meat, grass-fed or fresh fish, I can achieve a better sense of serenity. And with a yoga practice, go check out my yoga website, yogadelics.com, YouTube channel, Yogadelics, with a more chilled yoga practice, even with more chill weightlifting. and a more chill lifestyle, I've attained a sense of happiness. But it's not the happiness, because he talks about people who were generally happy. For years, man, I was addicted to caffeine. It might sound a little bit weird, but I couldn't have any level of caffeine, even this much coffee or tea, without having a brutal migraine the next day that would last for 2 days. Could incapacitate me. Couldn't do anything about it. Essential oils, ibuprofen, aspirin, every solution, hydration salts, electrolytes, nothing could help. I would just have to take it. So I would get sucked into doing but then stressful environments would give me the migraines also, and the only solution to fix those would be caffeine. So I'd get sucked in. And I haven't had a headache or had any caffeine in 2 years now, because I've chosen to live a very calm life. And the only times I have experienced any headaches over the last 2 years is when I got going too fast, and I said, okay, Ian, calm down. It's very important to understand this. And it's very important as a man not to get going too much, or you're going to get Jonestown, bro. You're not going to end up someplace good. You're going to become a tyrant. To become a great leader, you need humility, as I said earlier before. And that is a sense of calmness. It's not a sense if something's happening, or if you're wrong, or if your team's done good, or if you've missed credit. Be humble. That's a teaching from all cultures. It works. It's great. A lot of myths and psychologists, even and spiritual practitioners, say that the more you talk, the more you do stuff like this, like what I'm doing right now, it actually makes me more ungrounded. And when I'm doing this, like, look, I have a light on me right now. I'm speaking. I have cameras going. There's a microphone. You might go to a job. Like when I would go and work at like, I'm an online teacher right now, but when I taught in person, just all the action, all the things would give me very bad headaches. That's why I switched to online teaching. So we return to the story of Galahad, though, and his encounter with the Grail Castle. He is out riding. He meets the Fisher King and is invited into his own inner consciousness. This happens all the time for us modern spiritual seekers. And we ride into the Grail Castle, and the ritual commences where everyone is drinking. But Galahad forgets to ask the question that he was taught by his mentor: for whom does the Grail serve? And he does not get the opportunity to get the benefits of the Grail Kingdom. So Galahad wakes up the next morning, the king is carried off, and he rides out. He has seen the Grail vision. He has felt the Grail vision. He had it in his hands, but he missed it. And this happens all the time to modern men, because we are not well equipped. Some of the only people who I can think of that actually in history that weren't like monastic people, but were modern thinkers, were actually Arthur Rimbaud. Arthur Rimbaud, by the time he was 16, 17, 18, was writing some of the best 19th century poetry of all time. You know, amazing poet. Arthur Rimbaud, everybody. Go look up his life story. Basically had all of his best stuff written before he was 18 years old. That's how you read people who are trying to get who are getting MFAs right now. They are freaking, that's why I always wonder, man. I'm like, Arthur Rimbaud can beat creative writing professors, his 16-year-old poetry. No 16-year-old doing that today can do that. Anyway, just an aside about poetry. So every youth blunders his way, quote, into the Grail Castle sometime around the age of 15 or 16 and has a vision that shapes much of the rest of his life. What was that for you guys? Where did you go, man? I remember having some very deep moments while skiing, man. You know, just sitting out there in the woods and just like feeling everything, like really making me emotional to think about, man. Things I'll probably never, at that level of innocence and stuff. I went to the Grail Castle, man, and I didn't ask the question. I didn't know. Who knows? No one knows about Sankalpas and your life's divine purpose and serving that. And if they do, it's for some Christian reason. I'm talking about pure, untethered, divine. Who knew to serve that? Who was really into doing that at the age of 16? Maybe you were, man. Maybe, but not most of us. Quote, a man's work is nothing. So this is a quote by Albert Camus, everybody. And that really, when I was reading this today, when I read through the text, this is what came out to me. I remember this quote. A man's work is nothing more than to rediscover through the detour of art those one or two images in the presence of which his heart first opened. And what were those images for you guys, man? Like, Albert Camus actually kind of helped me in that process, you know, a long time ago, man, with reading. And it really opened up my heart, those first images, man, were Siddhartha, the book by Hermann Hesse, and him out there finally achieving enlightenment on the boat at the end of the text. So what holds him back? Why didn't I ask that question when I was 16? And this is going to be hard to admit, but my mother complex, which resides entirely inside the man himself, quoting Robert A. Johnson. This is his regressive capacity, which would like to return to a dependency on his mother and be a child again. This is a man's wish to fail, his defeatist capacity, his subterranean fascination with death or accident, his demand to be taken care of. This is a pure poison in a man's psychology. Once again, if you see men who are in paralysis with so much of this is the mother complex. This is the mood. This is the you did something wrong and you don't want to come home and deal with your mom's mood mentality. Because that's what happens, right? You don't want to deal with the mood because we can't understand that. I didn't really mention that earlier. But men and women are different, according to Robert A. Johnson, because women can function in mood in a positive way, but men cannot. So Robert A. Johnson describes 6 ways that we can relate to his mother. And so that is the mother complex. There's also the mother archetype, which I think is important to talk about. The mother complex is pure poison. The mother archetype is pure gold. It is the feminine half of God, the cornucopia of the universe, Mother Nature, the bounty which is freely poured out to us without fail. We cannot live for 1 minute without the bounty of the mother archetype. It was always reliable, nourishing, and sustaining. And it's true. The mothering archetype of life is always around us. We can always tap into it. If you're ever scared, lonely, need to actually activate the sympathetic nervous system, if I got that right, think about the mother, man. Relish in that. There's some other ones, of course. There is the fair maiden. This is the feminine component in man's psychic. This is Blanca. This is the knights errant. There is, of course, the wife and the partner. And then there is Sophia, which is the wisdomatic aspects of the feminine. But the problems occur, for instance, that if one contaminates one's mother with one's mother complex, he will blame his actual mother for the regressive quality. Let me put this quote up. That is his mother's interior mother complex. He will see his mother as a witch who is trying to defeat him. So if he contaminates his mother image with the mother archetype, he will expect his flesh and blood mother to play the goddess of protection for him, a role which only the archetype can provide. He will make ridiculous and excessive demands on the mother aspect of the world and demand that the world owes him a living, preferably without effort on his part. And we see this all the time. This is the mother taking care of us, the mother government, right? The mother state, the nanny state, right? And then we have the daddy state, protect us. That's actually the 2 parts of American politics and politics in general is like, daddy, please protect me from, whatever evil. And mother, please take care of me. And how most men do this, most men actually aren't that deep to do this. Most of us, I've never really done this. Maybe I have. All of us have done it, is to project we contaminate the mother image with our flesh and blood partner. And that creates a lot of problems because we project our mother onto our partner. And that creates a lot of neediness and a lot of problems. Just like you don't want to be, some dudes want to be some girl's daddy, but you don't really want to be their daddy outside of, kink oriented aspects of life. You really do, unless you're trying to go all the way, but that is a little bit odd. I'm in support of that. If you want to do that, that's cool. I don't find it that odd. But there is something that's happening, and especially it's fine if if it's consenting, right? If both parties are cool with it and enjoy it, that's fine. But if you're projecting this onto someone that doesn't know what's happening, that's a problem. I'm sorry if I'm trying to make that sound negative because I am very open to alternative sexuality as a polyamorous person. So the Grail hunger is a real thing. So quote, the Grail is always near one and available at any moment. But 16 and 45 times of change seem to be the 2 points in a man's life when it's most easily found. That miraculous procession goes on every night of one's life in the Grail Castle, but is only at particular times in his life, and then only when he has prepared for it, that a man has easy access to the splendor of the Grail Castle. So the Grail hunger is real, everybody, and it goes on, and most of us chase it forever. Either we forget about it, or we play into it. And Robert A. Johnson mentions advertising and drugs. He says that we can be sold things that if it appeals to us. That's what they try to give us. That's what advertising and products try to give us. We want it to give us meaning. But as you probably know, meaning is something that you have to find yourself. And with drugs, it gives us the shortcut. You go right to the Grail Castle, but the real Grail Castle is not found in a short manner. It is something that requires effort and preparation. And drugs can be a part of it, but drugs aren't the solution to it. Drugs can maybe aid you in relaxation and the sattvic path, but not the actual ascent. And a lot of people forget that, and driving down, going fast in cars and womanizing and all these different things are all just ways to get rid of the Grail hunger, the hunger to have this moment back again, to feel that. And that's also the problem with advertising and psychedelics and all these things is they make you want more. You feel these peak experiences and you want to keep doing it. And it requires a lot of self-control to not do that anymore. To actually sit down and chill. And that's what we are doing, everybody. We are, once again, trying. If the Grail quest is sidetracked by many of the ways possible, the youth finds himself all too soon a crotchety old man. I know so many guys that are doing this, that had this vision, that have all this potential to be like, dude, I used to listen to the Grateful Dead, man. Oh my God. I'm like, what have you been doing the last 30 years? FBI. All right. Goodbye. Adios. It's over. Most people can't find it at old age. We have to find it soon, or that life is gone, that purpose. Imagine a 60-year-old. Sometimes 60-year-olds find purpose, but it's not that same purpose. Most of the great 60-year-olds are just riding the wave from the 30s and 40s, honestly. So the Grail hunger is a real thing. So, quote, the Grail is always near one and available at any moment. But 16 and 45 times of change seem to be the 2 points in a man's life when it's most easily found. That miraculous procession goes on every night of one's life in the Grail Castle, but is only at particular times in his life, and then only when he has prepared for it, that a man has easy access to the splendor of the Grail Castle. So the Grail hunger is real, everybody, and it goes on, and most of us chase it forever. Either we forget about it, or we play into it. And Robert A. Johnson mentions advertising and drugs. He says that we can be sold things that if it appeals to us. That's what they try to give us. That's what advertising and products try to give us. We want it to give us meaning. But as you probably know, meaning is something that you have to find yourself. And with drugs, it gives us the shortcut. You go right to the Grail Castle, but the real Grail Castle is not found in a short manner. It is something that requires effort and preparation. And drugs can be a part of it, but drugs aren't the solution to it. Drugs can maybe aid you in relaxation and the sattvic path, but not the actual ascent. And a lot of people forget that, and driving down, going fast in cars and womanizing and all these different things are all just ways to get rid of the Grail hunger, the hunger to have this moment back again, to feel that. And that's also the problem with advertising and psychedelics and all these things is they make you want more. You feel these peak experiences and you want to keep doing it. And it requires a lot of self-control to not do that anymore. To actually sit down and chill. And that's what we are doing, everybody. We are, once again, trying. If the Grail quest is sidetracked by many of the ways possible, the youth finds himself all too soon a crotchety old man. I know so many guys that are doing this, that had this vision, that have all this potential to be like, dude, I used to listen to the Grateful Dead, man. Oh my God. I'm like, what have you been doing the last 30 years? FBI. All right. Goodbye. Adios. It's over. Most people can't find it at old age. We have to find it soon, or that life is gone, that purpose. Imagine a 60-year-old. Sometimes 60-year-olds find purpose, but it's not that same purpose. Most of the great 60-year-olds are just riding the wave from the 30s and 40s, honestly. So the dry years of a man's life are very interesting. We call that the middle age, and you start balding, you start feeling a certain way. I'm heading toward that. At 28 years old, I'm on the fast track toward middle age soon. And the best part of this section is this part. Quote, the masculine equipment he carries with him, largely imitation of the father's teachers around him, will not hold up when he tries to use it by himself. Every youth has to go through the humiliation of finding that his imitation masculinity will not hold up. And more, only the father who gave him his sword can repair the broken instrument. This means that what was given by a father can only be repaired by a father. And that's why at the start we heard Finding the Father by Robert Bly. That was the poem. And you have to find the father. You have to go and confront him. And this could be a father figure. This could be a godfather. And you have to repair the sword. You have to repair that form of masculinity if you want to move on the journey. And for me, I had to forgive my father and other father figures and really let them help me. And it was hard and it is weird, especially with age gaps. And we're the modern mind, and the old people didn't even have cell phones. They didn't even have computers until 20 years ago, man. There's a difference, but it's okay. Trust me, it's worth it. Make sure not to do it with toxic people, of course. But if you have someone positive in your life, really try to tap back into those people that gave you that first imitation masculinity. Even if it's through dreams, even if it's through active imagination, if they're dead now. That is a very valuable tool that should be used now. So Galahad returns to King Arthur's court, and everyone loves it. Everyone's praising him. But the hideous damsel comes and lays into him, tells him all of his sins, everything that he's done wrong, and then basically ends the group nature of King Arthur's courts so that the knights all become solitary travelers. And more on that in a second. So, quote, "It is the accomplished man who is most capable of asking unanswerable questions about his worth and the meaning of life." So at some point, as you start to ascend the chain of consciousness, as you start to move into higher consciousness and go on the journey, the big questions are going to come up. Like even just like, what is consciousness? But even more like, how do we liberate the world? How do we end suffering? Does evil exist? Is it evolution, creationism, or interference? It's like all the big questions start coming up and you can't tackle them. And even quite answerable questions become harder. So like, for instance, lifestyle, man. If I suddenly, poverty is hard, but what could be harder is to have millions of people listening to every single one of my words and then know that I have to now use my potential. Right now I have 550 subscribers. What if I had 10 million? If I was an in-tune person, I would know that was a huge responsibility, and I could use that to help save millions of people and put them on this journey, save them from unnecessary violence or toxic relationships or abuse. Same with money. What are you going to do with your money? A lot of your friends or family, what if you had $10 million right now? Would your friends and family treat you the same? How are you going to handle that situation? It's like, then for like yoga, for instance, and the spiritual questions, sometimes they are answerable. Like at some level in my yoga practice, I realized violence and how it is done to us on a molecular and to even, to the most direct level, the whole chain. But then I have to resume my responsibilities in the world and feel that and understand that. What do you do about that? How do you integrate that into your consciousness without becoming a schizophrenic? That's why a lot of schizophrenics go down. That's why a lot of people struggle with psychedelic drugs. They can't actually reintegrate. They can't become what we call a complex or I can't remember, but there's certain categories that like you have experiences that don't mold with this reality, and the normal schizophrenic can't reintegrate them, but other people can, and they can function. So just a quick word though to everybody is that when it comes to dating and it comes to life, and we talk about this don't chase, man. If you become great, people will come to you. People will want to be around you. And I'm not just talking about superficial people. I'm talking about the real people. There is no such thing as breaking the ice. There is no such thing as approach anxiety or that you're never going to find anybody. That doesn't exist. I haven't felt that in 5, 6, 7, 8 years now, because one day I realized everyone is me and I am them, that we have this connection at some level. So there is no breaking the ice on the spiritual level, but on a physical level, I don't need anything. You need to accept first that what if you never had sex or never had a relationship for the rest of your life? Could you still be happy? If the answer is no, and I mean truly happy, like happy, just as happy if you did have those things and a family and all that, then if you can't say that, then you are going to come into your relationships with neediness, into your search for relationships or whatever with a sense of neediness. I feel 100 content being as broke as I have been this last decade in poverty. I'm cool with that. If I have to live out the next 60 years like that, all right, so be it. I know what to do. I have a lot of fun. Nature, books, yoga, love, it's also accessible to me. All the real shit. Let it come to you. If you put yourself in situations where there are people who are alike, who are alike with you, you will find anything that you want. Friends, relationship partners. If you want threesomes, like whatever, bro, it's not that hard. You know, everyone puts themselves into these positions from the start. We compromise, and that's kind of what this hideous damsel. So, quote, in our tranquilizer world age, it is the general opinion that the hideous damsel time should be avoided and treated as an illness to be cured. To banish her darkness is to sterilize one's chance at the evolution she brings. Quote, and then, quote, when one accepts the solitariness of his journey, there's no comparison possible, and he is in that existential world where things simply are. And this kind of brings up an interesting point that we avoid this, and we avoid this with this muscle car and joining a gym again, and all the typical ways that men avoid this, or they just put their heads down. And you know, have you ever seen a guy like this? Like, I've known a lot of guys in their 40s and 50s, man, and they're going through this, and they have a lot of artistic potential, but they just put their heads down, man. Their family doesn't support them. Their wives don't support them. Our society doesn't support them. And flip side too, men don't support women on their similar journey. Some men also start looking for the second wife, right? Start looking for the trophy wife. And sometimes this needs to happen, but most of the time it doesn't need to happen, because the reason that most men seek that out is the reason that they got into the bad relationship in the first place. Like, I have always said, like, I knew getting into the relationship I'm in now that unless my partner was polyamorous and bisexual, I wasn't going to do it, no matter who they were, because that would create problems down the road that I didn't want to deal with, right? That is important. You have to have these standards. And if there are these huge divides in your relationship, then yes, you're going to have to leave. But don't do it. Don't even get sucked into it, so that you never have to have this problem of having to figure out and replace the old damsel with the new damsel, because most of the time it doesn't fix this problem, because it's not an external thing. Once again, it's an internal thing. So this internal problem is not going to be fixed by someone else, unless they are being, I would say, unless someone's really being extremely toxic to you. I don't know. I mean, there's different ways to think about this. Like, that's more of a, I would recommend the book Too Good to Stay. No, Too Bad to Leave, Too Good to Stay, or something. There's a really good book on there to assess your relationship. So quote, when one accepts, so another quote, the solitariness of his journey, there's no comparison possible, and he is in that existential world where things simply are. And this feels so good to enter that ecstatic state. This is the phenomenological consciousness we were talking about in the spiritual ecology course, where you can just be and where things are because you have a purpose. It feels relaxed. It feels like you have time. It doesn't feel stressful. Like for me, man, I have 60 more years to make videos like this. If I keep doing a book a week for the men's book club, man, 54 times 60, was that 3,000 books? That's a lot, man. If I actually do that, man, that's a lot of book club meetings, man. We have with me attending, we have about 3,000 more, everybody. That's a lot, dude. That is a lot of, maybe my math's wrong, 50 times 60. I think that's 3,000. 3,000 books. We could cover everything. Like, that is overboard. But that's what this is going to be. I am going to take that there. Same with my books. Same with my life with my partner and my pets and my kids, man. I'm going to enjoy that. And every single day, I'm going to show up to that. I'm not going to compromise. Because I have accepted that journey. I see what things are. That's what writing is supposed to do. That's what's crazy. Most people don't understand, like, they write, we read and we write and we do yoga for like all the wrong reasons, and go out into nature. And it's like, nature can teach you about how things are. Writing can too, because if you write enough and you read enough, you're going to realize and tap in to the Chinese poets, to Ezra Pound, to T.S. Eliot, to Charles Olson, to Robert Bly, to oh my gosh, I'm blanking on her. Guess she's not that important. There are poets like Mary Oliver out there that have seen this. You can find this in film. You can see this everywhere. It's just one aspect in postmodernism. There's so many different angles, but being able to understand that is actually a metaphor to how to live your life. Do you really want to live a postmodernist life all the time? I like to get super trippy, but that's in very controlled ways. But the normal extent of my life, I want to be a very objective, and I want to have an accurate perception of reality. I think that's one of the main goals that we should have as men. So one more quote. The chastity required of a man in this quest is that he neither seduce nor be seduced by the inner woman in terms of mood or anima. All the knights except Galahad fail in their quest. That is to say, there will be many failures in one's life quest, but it is absolutely necessary that consciousness stay true to the quest. Perfection or a good score is not required, but consciousness is. And this is it, everybody. Don't lose the thread. Stay conscious. Keep the fire going. It doesn't matter where you end up. I could do 3,000 of these meetings, man, and book reviews and clubs, discussions, and maybe no one ever will listen. Maybe it'll just be a small crowd the whole time. And that's fine, man, because I'm not keeping score. I care about doing it. I care about staying conscious and sharing work and speaking with others and gathering the troops, man, to then share more and getting you guys activated to then publish your own work and to do your own things in your own local communities. And we could spread this everywhere. All it takes is 5 people in each major city and in each, general area to really change things if they're activated and they're ready, because they can recruit others like that, man. People love this type of stuff. And what I mean by recruit is for educational content, man. This isn't no agenda, just for education, for like actual self-education and helping people find meaning. So for instance, there's some really harsh things that in our society right now that seduce us with the inner woman. And I would say 2 of the main ones are dating apps and porn. So obviously porn is like fake, right? Like, there's this quick experience, result, probably a decline in energy or whatever after you're done. Boom. That one's pretty obvious. But Tinder, man, a lot of guys use dating apps, right? And most of the time they settle for low quality matches on those apps. Unless you are... So have you guys ever heard those studies that were done? And we're going to talk about this more at a different time. That when men were studied, they found 80%. So they found 80% of women of all ages attractive. Women, on the other hand, only found 20% of men attractive. You hear that's... I always love mentioning that to people just because I know the response. That's just biology. Women have to be more selective. Maybe it's something called social engineering. Anyway, if you are not, and this has been covered by so many different people, man. This has come out over the last couple of years and been pushed obviously by the men's movement that like this happens. Like I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much, but like this is an obvious fact, man. And on Tinder, unless you are a top dog, you're not a top dog. Like, it hurts all men's egos and boosts all women's egos, right? So, if you want to be a sexual deviant, right? If you want to go have sex with a lot of women, whatever, man. If that's part of your journey or like what you need to do, we don't care. No one cares, bro. But you need to become a character and the type of person that can find people in real life to do that. That it works out so much better. And that's not being seduced by the inner woman as much. That's you. If you're doing it in the correct way, like I said, if it's a part of your path and you sit with it and you're patient with it, it's a part of your journey. It's a part of a individuation process. I'm not someone that says, I like I said, I am a polyamorous, open person. And it's a lot better for some people. Like, living that monogamous lifestyle was the worst choice I ever made because, let's just be honest. It's so much more fun, but I understand why some people do it. And that's a different story for a different day. And I'll just say it right now, man. I feel like most guys do it because they would. most guys would probably have threesomes if their wives or girlfriends let them. But that, like I said, I don't want to go there. That we'll talk about that on another episode of the men's book club. We'll read like a polyamory book sometime. So I think that's a good summary of the hideous damsel. So Galahad finds the hermit, and the hermit berates him just like the hideous damsel did. But much like mentor figures we've had before, maybe as men, they tear us down a little bit, but then they take us with them. And the hermit is a very interesting archetype, and it's also a tarot card. And it's weird because a lot of older, like in Robert Johnson's generation, this was a problem. Like a lot of men born in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, they had to live an extroverted life. Now, though, there are a lot of introverted hermit people, but they're not actually doing the work, though, because of technology. Being a hermit requires not that much. A real introvert doesn't seek that much stimulation. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they like books and other things, but the hyperstimulation of video games, of porn, of all these different things that people under the age of 30 now who've had technology their whole life engage in don't make you a hermit. If you've been introverted, that is no, you haven't even started the journey yet. You never have even entered the forest. People that call themselves introverted, a lot of the time the hermit makes a conscious choice to go and do this. Robert Bly would say, if you want to learn poetry, go live in a hut. Go stay and don't speak to anyone for 6 months. That's what he did. That's what he did in New York City. And it's actually Sleeper Joining Hands by Robert Bly. Excuse me on that point. And I got the book real fast, and here's a quote. For the first time in months, I loved the dark. A joy pierces into me. It arrives like a runner. A radio signal from inside a tree trunk. A smile spreads over the face. The eyes fall. I mean, it's such a beautiful poem. I mean, it's a huge poem. Not going to read it all. I would recommend it. Sleepers Joining Hands by Robert Bly. So, if you have a born hermit as a son, don't push him into red night experiences, but let him find his own forest way. Don't make him get into these confrontational experiences. And once again, that's a problem because in this society, like I know kids, I know like cousins and stuff. And of course I'm a freaking teacher, man. I'm a middle school English teacher. I see this all the time. All these kids who I want to just push into red night experiences because they're not introverts. They're not the 1 out of 100 or whatever that's actually the born hermit. They've been kicked into paralysis and social anxiety because of technology and the way that they've been raised. So it's kind of hard today because I don't see as much those type of characters that really are just hermits in general. And I don't need to push because a lot of these kids, it's the same thing though. They've been forced into this malignant hermitude. Especially now with COVID, all the kids that are doing online school and parents haven't let them hang out with other kids. It's created a lot of problems. And there's a lot of, depression and suicide and those types of things that occur without contact as a teenager. Could you imagine I know kids who they're in 8th grade and haven't had contact with another kid their age that wasn't a family member since the 5th grade. 3 years, no contact with outside kids. It's insane. And they're trigger shy, man. They're not to do things that require individuation. And to throw them into the wolves it has the same reaction as the born hermit, but they even react worse. They react if you throw a hermit like this into things like that, they kind of get paralyzed and maybe a little bit resentful, but that's it. But these kids today, if you throw them into situations like this, could hurt themselves, or like it could be a huge problem. This happens all the time. The son that dad is a football coach and pushes them too much, and then they're all screwed up, a couple years after high school. I know so many people like that. Maybe know a lot too, and they actually have a lot of trouble with their own masculinity because of getting pushed way too hard by their over ambitious parents. So the chapter ends with this nice quote. The Grail Castle is always just down the road and a turn to the left. If anyone is humble enough and of good heart, he can find that interior castle. Galahad has had the arrogance beaten out of him by 20 years of fruitless searching, and he is now ready for his castle. And if we think about this, he should really be about 38 years old. Galahad isn't that old. Robert A. Johnson is speaking, but if Galahad left home at, let's say 18, probably earlier than that, to defeat the Green Knight or the Red Knight, he is now 38, around that, in his late 30s, early 40s. You can find this. And that's like what I've been saying, is that most of the greatest accomplishments happen in men's 40s and 50s, even in their 60s, 70s, 80s. And I mean, for some people, even into the 90s, they're still doing things and making an impact. It gets a lot harder, but you still can. You can still bring the character who you created and, with some rest and selected events, make an impact. So we are like Galahad at the end of our journey, and Galahad enters the Grail Castle and asks, for whom does the Grail serve? The great question. And then it's over. The Grail King is joyous. Galahad finds that expression in the world, that oneness. And why does that happen? Quote, the object of life is not happiness, but to serve God or the Grail. All of the Grail quests are to serve God. If one understands this and drops his idiotic notion that the meaning of life is personal happiness, then one will find that elusive quality immediately at hand. There it is, everybody. It's a hard thing to accept for a lot of us. Like I said, a lot of us have a religious trauma. A lot of us don't like to do this. And I'm going to quote some Sankalpas that I like to use. Shout out Gregor Molly for these. And these are ones that I like to use sometimes to think about this. I deeply accept and love myself, and from that love, I share with others. I communicate and act only from the divine love in my heart. I give unconditional love to all. I am pure-hearted and selfless. I experience gratitude and appreciation for all I receive and for the miracle of my life. And these are all separate ones. I contribute to the lives of others from an infinite reservoir of love and creativity within me. Those aren't bad. That is Grail talk, though. That is a Grail that is trying to live my life in accordance with that. And you could come up with similar ones. It's very, it's a big process. It takes time, but it also takes patience and meditation and giving up on a lot of ambition and channeling that ambition into different things, because you can still make a lot of money. You can still get whatever you want in life, but changing the framing of it, changing how you approach it, changing how you motivate yourself, quitting the caffeine, quitting the booze, quitting the drugs, all these different things, finding groups of people that love you. These are all very noble things. And let's look at a couple more quotes to conclude. When Galahad learns that he is no longer the center of the universe, not even his own little kingdom, he is free of his alienation, and the Grail is no longer barred from him. Though he may come and go from the Grail Castle during the rest of his life, now he will never be alien to it again. The object of life is not happiness. Okay, I think we read that one. Yeah, so that's the conclusion, everybody, that to move into this unity consciousness, it requires that external force, that the Grail, the self, as Jung would say, the will, as Ronk would say, the orgone, as Reich would say. Whatever angle that takes is fine, but you have to be ready to serve that. You have to be ready to channel that, to create. I don't like to say serve. Serve doesn't work for me. And I don't think it will work for you. I call it a co-creative relationship, a friendship. It's give and take. Sometimes I receive messages and I'm like, hey, can we revise that a little bit? Like, this doesn't seem right. Let's try again. This is great, but this isn't aligned with me, because you'll get stepped on. I actually know a lot of people in the spiritual community that are pure vessels, and that energy source can be manipulative. Maybe not the pure one, but in that state of receptivity, you actually can let the inner feminine, especially as men, take over, and you might not realize it. You might think it's the Grail, but it's actually the inner feminine seducing you. And that's why you need to have some stature and some fortitude in yourself at all times. And same with flowing and flexibility for the other side, so that you remain in balance. So thank you guys for being here. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Go join the Ben's Book Club, mensbookclub.substack.com. I'd love to see you guys there, and I will see you guys next week. We are covering a book called Sun and Steel by Yukio Mishima on how to live life. And he's one of the most famous Japanese authors of all time. And if you've heard of him, he has probably the most insane ending of an author's life of all time. I'll just tell it to you. Spoiler alert. He takes over a military barrack with his militia, and he commits seppuku and kills himself after giving a speech about having to restore the honor back to Japan through the emperor. Imagine J.K. Rowling or Stephen King raising a militia and taking over your local base. It would be insane, and that's how big Mishima was. So we're covering his book next week. Make sure to tune in, and let me know if you guys have any comments. Make sure to comment. Let me know what you guys think, and thank you.